Okay, it's red. That should be red.
It's okay.
Okay, very good. Again, we're going to plunge ahead. This is still the first unit, the first lesson, but we'll pick up the pace here. We only have about 5 chapters to look at, and then we'll be done. And then we'll do our first small group with a big group. Any questions, though, or any comments? So we've gotten through the reign of Solomon. I want to read again about Rehoboam and then how Jeroboam becomes the king of Israel. And that's told in chapter 12. You may remember, no, of course, you do remember that when Joshua took possession of the land, he gathered the tribes together at a big meeting in Shechem. Shechem is in the middle of the country, and that's when they had that big covenant renewal. Well, Rehoboam does the same thing. Did every king do that? Was that kind of like a State of the Nation thing, that when these tribes would transition to a new ruler, do they have some kind of convocation or assembly in Shechem? We don't know. We saw it in Joshua 24, and here we see it in 1 Kings 12. So Rehoboam is there, and Jeroboam is there as well, because, look at verse 4. Actually, it's Jeroboam and all the assembly say to the king, "Your father made our yoke heavy. Now therefore lighten the hard service of your father and his heavy yoke upon us, and we will serve you." In verse 6, Rehoboam takes counsel with the elders, old men. Now, in the ancient world, old people had been around, and they knew things, they had experience. And so the old men say, "Yeah, your dad was kind of tough on people." Okay? People, there's opposition just beneath the surface. Verse 7, they said to him, "If you will be a servant to this people today and serve them," ruler, as we call them, public servants. Think about that. Huh? In Israel, the idea was the king's job was to serve the people, to look out for the little people. The big people can take care of themselves. The king's job is to look out for the little people. So the elders here are reminding Rehoboam of that tradition. Okay? If you serve them and speak good words to them when you answer them, then they will be your servants forever. See, by you serving them, they will serve you. But then Rehoboam takes counsel with the young men. Now, before having to read that, ancient people knew this is going to be a disaster. The counsel of young men is always self-focused and rash. Now, our culture is quite different. Huh? We have a culture that really loves what young people. It's fresh, it's new, it's what we need. But in the Bible, that's never the case. Okay, it's never the case. And they say, verse 9, he said to them, "What do you advise that we answer? Should I lighten the yoke that your father had put on us?" Verse 10, the young men who had grown up with him said, "Thus shall you speak to this people who said to you, 'Your father made our yoke heavy, but do you lighten it for us?' Thus shall you say to them, 'My little finger is thicker than my father's loin.'" Now that doesn't make much sense. It's a figure of speech. It's a euphemism. You know what a euphemism is? It's the way you avoid talking trash by using certain terms. By little finger, he means penis. So you think my dad was tough. My sexual member is bigger than his leg. It's a threat, okay? It's a threat. "Now, whereas my father laid upon you a heavy yoke, I will add to your yoke. My father chastised you with whips, I will chastise you with scorpions." He's a tough guy. Huh? And that leads to the sundering of the nation. Remember, the tribes, though back in Genesis, they're all children of the one father, Jacob, you get this sense throughout the rest of the Old Testament that the 12 tribes were really somewhat different people. Like, think of the states at the beginning of our country. How they struggled to get together to agree to a constitution. How initially after the war with Britain, we had a confederation, a very loose, and that wasn't working. So then they got to the Constitution because they needed a stronger government. So think of the tribes as very independent. And the northern tribes then say, we're out of here. And Jeroboam, who was, ironically, was Rehoboam's man for forced labor, becomes their king. Okay? And now, again, remember, the books of Kings were written during the exile, using earlier sources. And I should say this, the view is southern. That is, the people who wrote these books were Judahites. So even when they say nasty things about Judah, that's their land. The northern kingdom, there is nothing good. There is nothing good to be said about the northern kingdom in the book of Kings. Okay? And here is the prime example of this. So, verse 26. Jeroboam said in his heart, now the kingdom will turn back to the house of David if this people go up to offer sacrifices in the house of the Lord at Jerusalem. Then the heart of this people will turn again to their Lord. So think about what's it called in the cities, the big Mall of America. Okay, now if Minnesota was the southern kingdom and the Mall of America is Jerusalem, the king of Wisconsin doesn't want his people shopping at the Mall of America. So he's going to build two malls, one at Hudson and one in Janesville. So that everybody who wants to go to Chicago or to go to Mall of America will pass a great mall in his kingdom. So that's what Jeroboam does. He builds two shrines, the little temples. One at Dan, way up north, and the other one at Bethel, way at the south. Now, south of the northern kingdom. Okay, not Beersheba, way south, but the southernmost town in the northern kingdom. So that the people of Israel will not be tempted to go to Jerusalem. He wants to unite his people. Two shrines he builds. And here is the original sin of the northern kingdom. Verse 28. The king took counsel and made 2 calves of gold. He said to the people, you have gone up to Jerusalem long enough. Behold your gods, plural, O Israel, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt. He set one at Bethel, and the other he put in Dan. Verse 31. He also made houses on other high places, and appointed priests from among all the people who were not of the tribe of Levi. And Jeroboam appointed a feast on the 15th day. So what does Jeroboam give them? He gives them an alternative temples, alternative priests, alternative religious calendar. He's trying to separate his people from Rehoboam's people, which politically, that's a smart move. You know, you see what he's doing? It's a bright move. But the authors of Kings see it as the original sin of Jeroboam. In fact, he phrases it in the very words that goes back to Exodus 34 with the golden calf. If you want to go back, or 32 actually, 32 is when the story starts. When Moses is up on the mountain and the people want a god, and Aaron takes gold, he says, here are your gods. Aaron says, here are your gods, O Israel. The very words of Jeroboam. So anybody who knows their Bible is saying, oh my God, it's the same thing. It's as bad as that. Okay? So again, it's a southern point of view. I am sure Jeroboam didn't really say that. Here are your plural gods. But he has plural because he's got 2 statues. One for Dan, one for Bethel. Okay? So that's the original sin. Okay? And nothing, so that's why Jeroboam is the bad guy. When the books of Kings value or weigh the life of a king, they always refer to he sinned like his father Jeroboam. Okay? All right. Is there something else? Look at chapter 15. And you have your list of kings, huh? Okay, have that out. So you see Rehoboam, and then you see that's the southern kingdom. You have Jeroboam. Jeroboam reigns for 21 years. His son Nadab reigns for 1 year, and then he's assassinated. Okay, that's the end of his line. Okay, on the left-hand side, Rehoboam's son Abijam follows, and then Abijam's son Asa follows. And Asa is remarkable in that he's one of the handful of kings who gets a passing grade. Look at chapter 15, verse 11. And Asa did what was right in the eyes of the Lord, as David his father had done. He put away the male cult prostitutes out of the land and removed all the idols that his fathers had made. He also removed Maacah, his mother, from being queen mother because she had an abominable image made for Asherah. So again, Maacah was likely a foreign princess who was married to Abijam, who was Asa's dad. And so when Asa becomes king, she becomes king mother, which is really powerful. Again, think, if you've got let's say you've got 15 wives. Let's just say 15. And you're having relations with all of them, and most of them have baby boys, and you don't know who the successor is going to be. Okay? So can you imagine the catfight in the harem about my son is better than your son? Okay? Sort of thing. When the king dies and one of the sons somehow becomes king, his mother becomes queen mother. Okay? And the other women are like laundry, kitchen. Okay? At best, huh? So the queen mother carries a lot of weight because, well, like in our own life, mothers are your mom. It's an epic thing, your mom, huh? And she could call her children. She should be able to call her children for certain favors, huh? So anyway, so Asa is such a good king that he just gets rid of his mom because she's following likely the religion of her upbringing. Asa cut down her image, not the mom, not the mother herself, but the image of Asherah, and burned it in the brook Kidron. But the high places were not taken away. Nevertheless, the heart of Asa was wholly true to the Lord all his days. Okay? Chapter 17. Actually, just a few verses before. We're in the north now, okay? Look at chapter 16, verse 23. It says, in the 31st year of Asa, king of Judah, so he reigned like forever, huh? From 915 to 873, 27, 37, 42 years, okay? So in the south, there's great stability, okay? But in verse 23, it says, Omri began to reign over Israel and reigned for 12 years. And then they named the capitals where he lived. He had several different capitals. Okay, so Omri also had a 7-year reign. But Omri is able, the house of Omri, the dynasty of Omri lasts for 4 kings, which is pretty good for the north. Omri, Ahab, Ahaziah, Jehoram. That's one family, one dynasty. You don't have a lot of evidence for the kings of the Jewish people in Egyptian or Assyrian sources, but we do have some artwork showing that are talking about the house. It's Assyrian, so that's Mesopotamia. The house of Omri. So the house of Omri was the name for the dynasty. And Omri is a pretty powerful king. But notice the Bible deals with him like in 5 verses. The book of Kings is not looking at these people in a political sense, how mighty they were with armies, but in a religious sense. How faithfully did they keep the covenant? All right? So verse 25. Omri did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, and did more evil than all who were before him, which is pretty tough, huh? 29. In the 38th year of Asa, king of Judah, Ahab, son of Omri, began to reign over Israel. Ahab was the son of Omri, reigned over Israel in Samaria 22 years. And Ahab, son of Omri, did evil in the sight of the Lord more than all that were before him, as if it had been a light thing for him to walk in the sins of Jeroboam, son of Nebat. He took for wife Jezebel, daughter of Ethbaal, king of the Sidonians, and went and served Baal and worshipped him. He erected an altar for Baal in the house of Baal, which he built in Samaria. And Ahab made an Asherah. Ahab did more to provoke the Lord, the God of Israel, to anger than all the kings of Israel who were before him. You get the sense of the rhetoric here. Every king is worse than the one before, who was worse than all those who were before. But Ahab, it's a name, Ahab and Jezebel are a pairing that you should remember. They are the quintessential bad rulers, king and queen. That's why if I say Jezebel, what comes to mind? Jezebel. Why? How is the word Jezebel? If someone calls somebody a Jezebel today, what's the inclination or a loose woman, a floozy, drunken, sexual. Okay, now the original Jezebel may or may not have been that, but she is a powerful woman. Okay, and powerful women in the Old Testament don't come off well. Okay, it's a book written by men, huh? And if a woman claims to have authority, now Ahab, I say Ahab, what important figures, can you think of any important Ahabs? Moby Dick. Ahab is the captain of the Pequod. He is the villain in that book. Huh? So Jezebel and Ahab have become in English literature the names for villains because of what we're going to see here. Okay? Ahab is the king, Jezebel is the woman, and she wears the pants. And she's a foreigner again. Okay? So you got to cut her some slack. I mean, I cut her some slack because she wasn't a Jew. She's a Sidonian. She brought her religion with her. But from the vision of the books of Kings, this is what led the kingdom astray. And because she's wearing the pants, that is part of the difficulty. All right. So why was it important to know that? Because your reading began with 17. And it begins out of nowhere. Because this is the story of Elijah, who comes on the scene. Elijah the Tishbite of Tishbe in Gilead said to Ahab, "As the Lord the God of Israel lives, before whom I stand, there shall be neither dew nor rain these years except by my word." So Elijah comes out of nowhere. He springs out of a bush and says, "No rain until I say so." And he communicates that to the king. Okay? And there begins the next 10 chapters of the books of Kings are going to be about whom do we worship? Do we worship the God who brought us out of Egypt, Yahweh? Or do we worship the God who makes the rain fall? Now you're going to say, well, doesn't Yahweh make the rain fall? Yes, but as the Hebrews settled in the promised land, remember they didn't drive all the Canaanites out. The book of Deuteronomy warned them, drive them all out, because if you don't, they're going to marry your families and they're going to teach you dirty tricks. I think, again, that's by hindsight. I don't think really that the author saw all that. But in hindsight, that's exactly what happened. The Hebrews didn't necessarily have a great background in farming, but the Canaanites did. They had been farming in that land for centuries. So they probably learned to farm from the Canaanites. And the Canaanite god for the rain is... Oh, come on, say it like you're worshiping him, okay? The Canaanite god of the rain is Baal. Baal. Okay, you got to know this. This is big. This is big. Baal. And he's the storm god. Okay? He's the one, when we talked about the golden calf, we have emblems of Baal. He's shown as standing with a crown astride a bull with a lightning bolt in his hand. Okay, like this. And he's the one who makes it rain. And again, it only rains in Israel in the fall and winter, like for 3 or 4 months. It better rain, and better rain steady, over and over and over again, because then when the rains stop, the grain crops go, and you have grain by May. Okay, ready to harvest. So you have Jezebel, who is a Sidonian. She's a fan of Baal and Asherah, who is his sister, and Ahab is kind of a wuss, and so Jezebel becomes the focus of the bad vibes here. So Elijah says, "I speak for the God who controls the rain. I'm going to make the rain stop, not Baal." So see, that's not just a punishment. It's saying who controls. Like in Egypt, was it Pharaoh who was God or Yahweh who was God? Well, here is it Baal who makes it rain, or is it Yahweh who makes it rain? Elijah, his name is, in Hebrew, Eliyahu. Eliyahu. Whoops, sorry, Mark. That's God's name. Yahweh, get it? Yahweh, Yahu, Yahweh. El is God. El is God. That's the word God. Yahweh is God's personal name. And if you put a long I at the end, it makes the word possessive. So Shem is name. Shmi, my name. That's how they do that in Hebrew. So El is God. Eli, it means what?
My God.
My God. Put it together. Eli, Yahu.
My God is Yahweh.
Yahweh is my God. His name professes his creed. Yahweh is my God, not Baal. All right. So there, the next chapter, Elijah goes into, directed by God to go across the Jordan where he'll be fed by a raven. That works for a while. And then the stream Cherith dries up. He's told to go to Zarephath. Jesus will talk about this woman, the widow at Zarephath, because Elijah will camp out with her. And miraculously there's enough to eat, and there's plenty of oil, and her son dies and he heals him. So, but she's a foreigner. Get the irony of that. Elijah's enemy is a Sidonian. Zarephath is not real far away from Sidon. Okay, so it's not saying all Gentiles are awful or wicked, but there's some tension there. Chapter 18. You know that, by the way, if you go to daily mass or if you read the daily readings, this is what we were reading this week, huh? How ironic is that? This is the famous scene where the priests of Baal, was it 450 of them, I think, square off with Elijah over whose God is really God. And we'll have a contest. We'll offer an animal, and whoever can call down fire from heaven, that's the real God. And Elijah says, there's more of you, there's hundreds of you, you go first. So they prepare the altar, and they prepare the animal. And now the text here talks about them doing, where am I, Mark? I'm on a page here. About how they prepare. Look at verse 20. Ahab sent to all the people of Israel and gathered the prophets together at Mount Carmel. Elijah came near to all the people and said, "How long will you go limping with two different opinions? If Yahweh is God, follow him. If Baal, then follow him." And the people did not answer a word. So they have this contest. Elijah mocks them. Verse 27. He mocks the priest of Baal. At noon, Elijah mocked them, saying, "Cry aloud, he's a god. Maybe he's musing, or he's gone aside, or he's on a journey. Perhaps he's asleep and must be awakened." And they cry aloud and cut themselves after their custom with swords and lances until the blood gushed out upon them. So that kind of ecstatic behavior, jumping around, shouting, cutting yourself, that's seen in many religions. As a way, it's like to get God to act. There are flavors of Christianity that are kind of into that, huh? Really? Okay. So, but that's that ecstatic kind of religion, is that the gods relish this, but no good comes of it. Verse 29. As midday passed, they raved on until the time of the offering of the oblation, but there was no voice, no one answered, no one heeded, because there's no God named Baal. It's kind of implied there. Then Elijah does his thing. He rebuilds the altar. He pours water over the offering. He calls on God in Yahweh, verse 36. Fire comes from the heavens and eats up the offering and burns up the liquid. Verse 39. When all the people saw it, they fell on their faces. They said, "The Lord, he is God. The Lord, he is God." Now, you know enough Hebrew. What do they say? Almost Elijah's name. Okay? Yahweh El. Elah, El, something like Eliyahu, like Eliyahu, like his name actually. Okay, so now meanwhile, it hasn't rained for years. The rest of that chapter, Elijah sends his servant to look to the sea. Mount Carmel is right on the Mediterranean. And he says, "Go look to the west." All weather comes from the west. Go and see. And 7 times he goes. He says, "I finally see a little cloud, as little as that man's hand." And Elijah tells the king, Ahab, to get on his horses and heading home, because the storm is coming. Okay, verse 45. Verse 44. "Go up and say to Ahab, prepare your chariot, go down, lest the rain stop you. And in a little while the heavens grew black with clouds and wind, and there was a great rain. And Ahab rode and went to Jezreel." Jezreel. That city is 17 miles away. Okay, so he's trying to outrace the storm. But the verse goes on, "And the hand of the Lord was on Elijah, and he girded up his loins." He tucked in his skirts, and ran before Ahab to the entrance of Jezreel. He outruns the chariot. Now, it's meant to be somewhat like, ooh, but it's meant to show when God takes over someone, big, great things happen. He can outrun a horse. Okay? So at this point you think, oh, Elijah is going to win. Well, it's not as simple as that. Because the very next verse, Ahab told Jezebel all that Elijah had done, how he had slain all the prophets of Baal. Jezebel sent a messenger to Elijah an email saying, "So may the gods do to me and more if I do not make your life as the life of one of them by this time tomorrow." So she threatens his life. He was afraid, and he rose, and he went for his life and came to Beersheba. He heads south to the desert. Okay? Like 50, 60 miles. He's taken from the jaws of victory. He pulls defeat. And he's overwhelmed and crushed. And he goes out in the desert, and he goes under a bush, and he waits to die. And he sleeps, gets kind of sluggish. You get kind of sad and despairing at times. You just want to stay in bed. Huh? That's what Elijah's feeling. And an angel comes with a staff and pokes him and says, "Get up, eat and drink, or the journey will be too hard for you." And he looks on, and there's a little loaf of bread, a jug of water. He drinks and eats, goes back to bed. the angel again comes and prods him, eat and drink, or the journey will be too much for you. So again, heavenly nourishment is given to Elijah. And then it says, verse 8, he rose and ate and drank and went in the strength of that food for 40 days and 40 nights to Horeb, the Mount of God, also known as Sinai. Okay, so where's he? He's going back to the place of his ancestors' roots. It's like 3.5 centuries since Moses, but he's going back to the place where they first made their covenant with Yahweh. You know, that's a good psychological thing. When you're not doing, when things aren't going well, your work or your relationships, go back to a time when things were clearer, when you knew what you were supposed to be. Go look at your wedding pictures again. Go back to the school where you graduated and talk to the prof again. Go back to the day when you knew what you were to be and gain strength from it. He goes back to Horeb. Okay? And God says, what are you doing here? And he says, verse 10, I have been very jealous for the Lord, the God of hosts, and all I get is trouble. And God says, go, verse 11, go forth, stand upon the mountain before the Lord. And behold, the Lord passed by, and a great and strong wind rent the mountains and broke in pieces the rocks before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. And after the wind, an earthquake. But the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, a fire. But the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire, a still small voice. And when Elijah heard it, he wrapped his face in his mantle and went out and stood at the entrance of the cave. What has Elijah just been given? A vision of a theophany. This is Elijah in the steps of Moses. What did Moses ask after the golden calf incident? I want to see your face. And God says what? You can't see my face. You can see my back here in this cave. And then God walked past. Again, it was the first reading 2 Sundays ago. The Lord, merciful and gracious, kind. And so God announces who he is. And Moses sees God's back. Here, there's a kind of a riff on that. The typical stage props about a theophany, thunder and earthquake and fire. No, God doesn't always come in scary might. He comes in, now translations vary. Still small voice is a famous translation of this, or silence. You know, the idea of in stillness, in quiet, in gentleness. For preachers, it's a great opportunity to preach about the necessity of silence in your life. I'm not sure who said it, but somebody said, silence is the language of the Holy Spirit. It's how the Holy Spirit talks, in silence. And we have very little silence in our life. And our children even less. And the grandchildren, none at all. Just saying. Verse 15, the Lord said to him, go, return on your way to the wilderness of Damascus, and when you arrive, you shall anoint Hazael to be king over Syria. Jehu, son of Nimshi, you shall anoint to be king over Israel. Elisha, son of Shaphat of Abel-Meholah, you shall anoint to be prophet in your place. So he gets 3 tasks. He gets a jolt of God's grace and power, and he gets 3 tasks. The first one, he does right away. Verses 19 to the end of the chapter. He comes upon a fellow named Elisha. Elisha. So it's Elijah and Elisha, who is plowing with 12 yoke of oxen. He's got lots of money, big fields, those big John Deere tractors with the, that's what he's got. And Elijah casts his mantle upon him. That's a way of saying, I choose you. And he leaves the oxen and says, let me kiss my parents, then I will follow you. Elijah says, go back, I'm done with you. What have I done to you? He's challenging him. Drop everything and follow. Not when you want to, not later. Now is the time. And so he goes back to the oxen. He kills them all. He cooks them as a barbecue, gives it to his servants and people, and then he follows Elijah. This is an Old Testament call story. And Jesus references it in the Gospels about his disciples, that when he calls you, you drop everything. When Jesus approaches somebody, I think it's in Matthew chapter 9, and they say, let me go bury my father first. And Jesus says, let the dead bury their dead. Now, that sounds very cruel, but what he's saying is, now is the time. His dad isn't dead. His dad may not die for 20 years. Now is the time. Step on it now, or you'll never do it. There's some wisdom to that, too. We say, strike when the iron is hot. Huh? That's what Elijah is about here. 21. 21 is a wonderful story. Again, it shows Ahab, chapter 21. Yeah, 1 Kings 21. It starts out with a man named Naboth who lives in Jezreel. That's where the king has one of his palaces. And he's got a vineyard, and it's right next door to the palace. And Ahab likes it. He wants to add it to his property. So he asks to buy it. Or he could exchange, we give him other property. Verse 3, Naboth said to Ahab, the Lord forbid that I should give you the inheritance of my fathers. Remember, I think I told you when we read the book of Leviticus, the land was given after the Exodus was given to the family. And the whole idea of after 50 years, after the so-called Jubilee, the land has to, if you sold the land or lost the land, it needs to go back to the original family. God gave it to those families when they left Egypt. And so Naboth says, I'm not going to sell you. This is my ancestral land. It's been in our family for 3.5 centuries. And that puts Ahab in a funk. Okay? Verse 4. He lay down on his bed and turned away his face and would eat no food. Jezebel says, what's going on? And he says, Naboth won't sell me his vineyard. I mean, it's that kind of a whiny child thing. And verse 7, Jezebel, his wife, said, Do you now govern Israel? Rise, eat bread, let your heart be cheerful. I will give you the vineyard of Naboth the Jezreelite. This is where she shows that she's wearing the pants. She writes letters to people who accuse Naboth of having blasphemed against God. And so he is stoned. And as a blasphemer, the land is like if you don't pay your taxes, the land eventually is taken by the government. Well, the land reverts to the government. And Ahab is totally clueless. Verse 17. Well, no. Verse 15. As soon as Jezebel heard that Naboth had been stoned and was dead, Jezebel said to Ahab, Arise, take possession of the vineyard of Naboth the Jezreelite, which he refused to give you for money. Naboth is not alive, but dead. Now, she doesn't tell them the whole story, huh? And as soon as Ahab heard that Naboth was dead, Ahab rose to go down to the vineyard of Naboth the Jezreelite to take possession of it. So imagine he's got his vineyard clothes on, his garden clothes, a garden hat, and his little tools, sand bucket and tools, and he's walking down the road to visit his new vineyard. When Elijah hears about this, verse 20, Ahab said to Elijah, Have you found me, O my enemy? He answered, I have found you because you have sold yourself to do what is evil in the sight of the Lord. Behold, I will bring evil upon you. I will utterly sweep you away. I will cut off from Ahab every male bond or free in Israel. And I will make your house like the house of Jeroboam, son of Nebat, like the house of Baasha, son of Ahijah, for the anger to which you have provoked me, and because you have made Israel to sin. And of Jezebel, the Lord also said, The dogs shall eat Jezebel within the bounds of Jezreel. Now, this story is important because it reveals the justice side of a prophet's life. It's very frequent that you hear the phrase, someone tells truth to power. Okay, that's a phrase that's used a lot today. You know, you honk the governor, the mayor, the priest, the bishop. When you tell them something that they need to hear, they don't want to hear, you risk your own life, telling truth to power. Well, this is the premier example of it. Well, you could look back to David and Nathan, who kind of did the whole little story about the little lamb, trying to reveal David's part in sleeping with Bathsheba. Okay? So it's like that. And so Ahab comes on and said, the king is supposed to take care, remember I said earlier, the king is supposed to take care of the little people. And you have taken care of yourself. So it's a really dramatic story. And actually, Ahab repents. Verse 27. When Ahab heard those words, he rent his clothes and put sackcloth upon his flesh and fasted and lay in sackcloth and went about dejectedly. So, and that's why Ahab is given a long period of being a king. Again, remember in the Deuteronomy, God will if you do good, God will reward you. If you do badly, God will punish you. Well, how come God didn't smuck, Ahab? Well, this is how the narrator explains that. Ahab had a little conversion experience. Okay, and so he doesn't die immediately. All right? Now, you weren't asked to read 22, which is unfortunate. But I've been taking up a lot of time here, so I'm not going to read it. I would encourage you to read it on your own. Again, it shows the kings dealing with prophets. The era of the great prophets, the great era of prophecy in the Old Testament takes place while there were kings. When kings end, when there are no more kings, prophecy tends to dry up. I mean, there still are prophets, but they're not the great, like Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel. So, and Elisha here. So what happens in 22 is, this is a period when the northern kingdom, the southern kingdom, the kings are getting along, and they're going to go to war together against an enemy across the Jordan. And one of them says, well, let's pull a prophet in and see if what he says. And the host king, the northern king, he's got his prophets that he pays, the court prophets. They're his employees. And they come, oh, you're going to be wonderful, you're going to beat them all, we can see it, okay? And the king of Jerusalem says, are these the only prophets you have? Because he must see they all have they're all wearing the shirt that says, I love King whoever. and so, well, there's Micaiah, he says, but Micaiah always says nasty things. Well, we don't need him, but they call him on board. And Micaiah, this is verse, I am having you read it now, even though you're supposed not to. Verse 15, Micaiah comes in, and verse 15, he talks like the court kings, the court prophets. Go up, triumph, the Lord will give it to you in the hand of the king. The king said to him, how many times shall I abjure you that you speak to me nothing but the truth? He said, then Micaiah gives the real story. He says, I saw all Israel scattered upon the mountains as sheep that have no shepherd. And the Lord said, these have no master. Let each return to his home in peace. So what follows it is Micaiah explains that God wanted to punish the king and said, how should I punish them? And one of God's courtiers said, send him lying prophets. And so Micaiah is explaining why he is speaking the truth. The others are liars. And of course, guess who's right? Micaiah is right. The two kings go into battle, and they are both killed. Okay? So, anyway. Say what?
It's 11.
It's 11. I know, this is a good time to split, okay? So I'm going to go pick up lunch. I'll be gone maybe only 5-6 minutes. Take a long break, go outside. No, you can't. You got to pay for it. And then you need a break. And I need a break. So take a break. Thank you. Right? Break time.
Okay, we're coming back.
Don't leave the building. Just go for a little walk around here.
Well,
We're continuing.